In terms of our competitiveness, I think it mostly comes down to our pace of innovation. Our pace of innovation is much, much faster than the big aerospace companies or the sort of country-driven systems. And this is generally true. If you look at innovation from large companies or from smaller companies are generally better at innovating than larger companies. And it has to be that way from a Darwinian standpoint, because smaller companies would just die if they didn't try innovating. Because otherwise people just keep buying the product from the big company. So then why is SpaceX more innovative? I think it's probably because we've got like a super engineering-driven culture. I mean, we're running kind of the Silicon Valley operating system. It's kind of hard to describe. Like, it's like, how do you describe Linux? Like Linux is more efficient than some other operating systems.
to remain nameless.
Like, exactly why? I was like, you really have to get into the weeds. But you have a fairly flat hierarchy. You promote rapid communication. Sort of a best ideas wins culture, as opposed to this, having the seniority of the person decide the solution. Which, I mean, that should never be the case in engineering. It should always be, a rational basis. And I also believe that in terms of at the leadership level, I'd much rather promote someone who has strong engineering ability than so-called management ability. Like we do hire some MBAs, but it's usually in spite of the MBA, not because of it.
Okay. I think that deserves an applause.
So you started with a rocket.
Yeah, I mean that's a hard one, and it's the probability of success was low. In fact, when I started SpaceX, I thought that the most likely outcome was failure. And I think to have any other expectation would have been irrational. So
why did you want to do it? I know for Tesla it seems more obvious, like, oh, save the planet, big automakers aren't doing this. I mean, I think it's sort of fairly obvious what's
right.
good for humanity. Why did you feel like SpaceX needed to be done?
Well, I guess if you look at the trajectory of space technology and progress, the pinnacle of that progress was around maybe 1969, 1970, mm-hmm. with the moon missions. And so we made incredible progress in the 60s, and then we were able to land on the moon. And then with the space shuttle, we could only get people to low Earth orbit. Now the space shuttle is retired, and that's just there's no trajectory of improvement. It's a trajectory to nothing. Mm-hmm. So, and I kept thinking that there'd be some plan to send people to Mars, because that's the obvious next step. And the actual origin of SpaceX is when I was, I think it was around 2001 or so, and I was visiting a friend of mine, Adeo Resi, who actually you may have met, mm-hmm. but he lives in Palo Alto now. We were college housemates, and he asked me what I was going to do after PayPal, and I said, well, I've always been interested in space, but I didn't think there was anything I could do in space as an individual. So my initial plan in space was actually to do a small mission to Mars with a greenhouse, essentially seasoned dehydrated nutrient gel in a little greenhouse that would land, and you'd hydrate the gel, and then you'd grow the plants, and you'd have this great shot of green plants on a red background, and that would be the money shot, essentially. And the people tend to respond to precedents and superlatives, and this would be the furthest that life's ever traveled, the first life on Mars, as far as we know. And that would get people excited. And I thought, well, that would result in an increased NASA budget, and then we could send people to Mars, because that's, I think you want to have a future where you're expecting things to be better, not one where you're expecting things to be worse. Mm-hmm. So that was how things started out. And then as I learned more, and I went to, speaking of crazy things, went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. A strange experience.
So you've started a new company to do this called The Boring Company. Very nice, very funny. But
What's funny about that?
how much of your time is this?
It's maybe 2 or 3%.
You've called it a hobby. This is what an Elon Musk hobby looks like.
I mean, it really is, like, we actually, this is basically interns and people doing it part-time. So this is, we bought, some secondhand machinery, and it's kind of puttering along, but it's making good progress, so. And then I think it's also important to reason from first principles rather than by analogy. So the normal way that we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We're doing this because it's like something else that was done, or it's like what other people are doing.
Me Too type ideas.
Yeah,
Slight
slight iterations
take,
on a theme, and it's kind of mentally easier to reason by analogy rather than from first principles. But by first principles is kind of a physics way of looking at the world, and what that really means is you kind of boil things down to the most fundamental truths, and say, okay, what are we sure is true, or as sure as possible is true, and then reason up from there. That takes a lot more mental energy.
Give me an example of that. Like, what's one thing that you've done that on that you feel has worked for you?
Sure. So somebody could say, in fact, people do, that battery packs are really expensive, and that's just the way they'll always be, because that's the way they've been in the past. You're like, well, no, that's pretty dumb, because if you applied that reasoning to anything new, then you wouldn't be able to ever get to that new thing.
Right.
It's like you can't say, horses. Nobody wants a car because horses are great and we're used to them and they can eat grass and there's lots of grass all over the place, and there's there's no gasoline that people can buy, so people are never going to get cars.
Right.
People did say that, and for batteries, they would say, it's going to cost, historically it's cost $600 per kilowatt hour, and so it's not going to be much better than that in the future. And you say, no, okay, well, what are the batteries made of? So first principles would be to say, okay, what are the material constituents of the batteries? What is the spot market value of the material constituents? So you can say, okay, it's got cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, and some polymers for separation, and a steel can. So break that down on a material basis and say, okay, what if we bought that on the London Metal Exchange, what would each of those things cost? Like, it's like $80 per kilowatt hour. So clearly, you just need to think of clever ways to take those materials and combine them into the shape of a battery cell, and you can have batteries that are much, much cheaper than anyone realizes. I think the first is you need to work, depending upon how well you want to do, and particularly if you're starting a company, you need to work super hard. So what does super hard mean? Well, when my brother and I were starting our first company, instead of getting an apartment, we just rented a small office and we slept on the couch. And we showered at the YMCA, and we're so hot up we had just one computer. So the website was up during the day, and I was coding at night, 7 days a week, all the time. And I sort of briefly had a girlfriend in that period, and in order to be with me, she had to sleep in the office. So work hard, every waking hour. That's the thing I would say particularly if you're starting a company. And if you do simple math, say okay, if somebody else is working 50 hours and you're working 100, you'll get twice as much done in the course of a year as the other company. The other thing I'd say is that if you're creating a company or if you're joining a company, the most important thing is to attract great people. So either join a group that's amazing, that you really respect, or if you're building a company, you've got to gather great people. I mean, all a company is a group of people that have gathered together to create a product or service. And so depending upon how talented and hardworking that group is, and the degree to which they are focused cohesively in a good direction, that will determine the success of the company. So do everything you can to gather great people if you're creating a company.